First I give the introduction.
Yeah.
Hello all. My name is Neeraj Kabra. I'm an associate advocate at Law Chamber of Siddharth Murarka, and I'm the host for today's session. Today we have speaker senior advocate Rahul Narchania, and he will be enlightening us on today's topic. Before I hand over him to start the session, I request everyone to please. I've already muted everyone. Kindly please don't. Also please don't start your video because we are recording it, and it will create disturbance. Thank you so much. Now I request sir to kindly please take over and start the session.
Hi, good evening to you. I'm Rahul Narchania, and I'm going to discuss the Admiralty jurisdiction of the Bombay High Court with you. In the year 2017, for the first time in India, the Parliament enacted the Admiralty Jurisdiction and Settlement of Maritime Claims Act 2017. For the sake of brevity, I'll call it the Admiralty Act of 2017. Now, for over a century, we did not have any legislation in place to adjudicate and determine admiralty cases. And as a result, India was largely reliant upon the pre-British era statutes, such as the Admiralty Courts Act 1840 and the Admiralty Courts Act 1861. Now, both these acts were antiquated, and in fact, England itself had marched far ahead in time by promulgating various statutes, the Supreme Court of Judicature Act 1925, then the Administration of Justice Act 1956, and finally the Supreme Court Act of 1981. But India did not march ahead with times, and we still continued to follow the 1840 and the 1861 Act, which was antiquated. Then for the first time in the history of the Supreme Court, a case called the MV Elizabeth came up for hearing. And during that hearing, the counsels argued that the jurisdiction of the High Courts exercising admiralty jurisdiction was atrophied and rather stagnant, and as a result of which the Admiralty Court did not have the jurisdiction to arrest certain ships in certain circumstances. So the Supreme Court took a very broad view in the matter and went on to hold that not only was India not bound by the 1840 and 1861 Act, it could also follow international conventions and other statutes of other countries as long as it did not conflict with the domestic law of India. Now, because of this path-breaking judgment, several other high courts were emboldened to then take a very broad view of the jurisdiction of the court and began to then even proceed to arrest sister ships. Now, prior to the judgment of the MV Elizabeth, sister ships could never be arrested. Now, for those of you who do not know what sister ships are, it's basically if there are two ships owned by a ship owner and a claimant has a claim against ship A, he can always proceed by an action in rem to arrest ship B for the liability of ship A. So provided both ship A and ship B are owned by the same ship owner, the claimant could proceed against the sister ship to recover his claim. And that was not the position prevailing in India until 1993, when the Supreme Court in fact clarified that India could follow the principles of the Brussels Convention on Arrest of Ships, 1952. Thereafter, the Supreme Court, again in the year 2004, had the occasion to once again revisit the law when a case called the Sea Success went back to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court there held that the Geneva Convention 1999, a convention that was surprisingly not in force anywhere in the world because it did not have the number of signatories required, could also be applied to India. And as a result of which, a P&I insurance premium claim brought by a P&I club was considered a maritime claim under the Geneva Convention, and the right was given to the claimant to arrest the ship for recovery of unpaid insurance premium. So these two judgments, in fact, are path-breaking judgments. And in fact, it is the MV Elizabeth case which prompted the Parliament eventually in 2017 to enact the Admiralty Act of 2017. Now, having said that, this is the history of the law. Now, let's talk a little bit about the jurisdiction of the courts. Under the 2017 Act, a ship can only be arrested if it is lying and being within the jurisdiction of the court of that particular coastal state. So, for example, if the vessel is in somewhere in a port in Gujarat, you will be required to go to the port in Gujarat to arrest the ship. If the vessel is in Kakinada, you'll have to go to that court to arrest the ship. If it's in Maharashtra, you'll have to go to Bombay to arrest the ship. Prior to the 2017 Act, in fact, the Bombay High Court enjoyed pan-Indian jurisdiction. The effect of that was that you could arrest a ship in Bombay wheresoever it was, as long as it was within Indian territorial waters. But that pan-Indian jurisdiction was taken away by virtue of the 2017 Act. Therefore, now, if you have a claim against a particular ship and that ship is, say, in Andhra Pradesh, then you will have to go to the High Court of Andhra Pradesh to obtain an order of arrest of the ship. You cannot arrest it from Bombay as you could do earlier, that is prior to 2017. Now, what is the specialty of a admiralty action? Normally, when you seek to file a claim against a defendant, the first thing you will look to see is which court would have jurisdiction against that particular defendant. If you're filing a suit, say in a chartered court like Bombay, Madras, or Calcutta, then you would obviously apply the letters patent and you would look at clause 12 of the letters patent to see whether the court in Bombay, Madras, or Calcutta has jurisdiction. If part of the cause of action is there is an outside Bombay, Madras, or Calcutta, you would apply for leave under clause 12 prior to the institution of the suit. If it is not a chartered high court, you would apply section 20 of the Code of Civil Procedure to ascertain the jurisdiction of the court. Now, as far as admiralty goes, you don't need to rely upon clause 12. You also don't need to rely upon section 20 of the Code of Civil Procedure, because the specialty of an admiralty jurisdiction is this, that it is the presence of the vessel which confers jurisdiction upon the court. In other words, you may have a plaintiff who's a Greek national or a Greek national company, and the defendant, who's the ship owner, may be a Japanese company having its office in Japan. Neither of the two companies have any assets in India, nor do they have a branch office in India, nor do they have an agent in India. But if the dispute has arisen anywhere in the world, but the ship is, say, in Gujarat, you can proceed to arrest the vessel through the admiralty jurisdiction of the Gujarat High Court, because it is the presence of the vessel that confers jurisdiction upon the court. Now, how do you actually institute an action in rem? You institute an action in rem by arresting the ship, because the ship is considered to be the subject matter that you're proceeding against. In fact, surprisingly to many who aren't acquainted with admiralty or shipping law, it is the ship that is made a defendant in the suit. So, for example, if you have a ship by the name of ABC, you will actually make ABC a co-defendant to the suit. And you will then file the plaint making that ship a defendant, and you will proceed to move the court for arrest of that particular vessel ABC. So the ship is made a defendant to the suit. That is an action in rem. And an action in rem fructifies after you file the suit, making the ship a defendant and obtaining an order of arrest of that particular ship. Now, apart from an action in rem, there is also an action in personam, which is available against the shipping company, namely the owner of the vessel, or in some cases the charterer of the vessel, depending upon the facts of each case. In such a situation, you will make that particular company a party defendant along with the vessel. So you will have the vessel as defendant number 1 in an action in rem. You will name the owner of the vessel as defendant number 2 in the action in persona. So these are the two distinguishing features when it comes to invoking the jurisdiction of the Admiralty Court. You can proceed against a ship as if it is a defendant in its own right. Now, when and how can you arrest a vessel? In order to arrest a vessel, you need to have a maritime claim against the vessel. Now, when I say maritime claim against the vessel, I mean certain identified claims under the 2017 Act. So you cannot arrest a vessel for any kind of a claim. So let me give you an example. If you have a claim against, say, a vessel belonging to Shipping Corporation of India for, say, supplies made to the ship, like for example, you supplied food or provision to the crew who are working on board the ship, or you supplied fuel to the ship, or you supplied any other kind of important material to the ship, and the shipping company has not paid you, that would be considered to be a maritime claim, and you can proceed to arrest the ship for recovery of that claim. But let's say, for example, you have invested money in Shipping Corporation of India by obtaining a fixed deposit receipt from the Shipping Corporation of India. So you've invested money, you obtained a fixed deposit receipt, and Shipping Corporation doesn't pay you for that investment. The question is whether you can arrest the vessel in relation to that claim. And the answer is obviously no, because it is not considered to be a maritime claim. Now, what is a maritime claim? You will find in the 2017 Act. And if you have that Act before you, then might I request you to please turn to that Act. Otherwise, what I intend to do is I will slowly read the various claims that are considered to be maritime claims, and wherever any explanation is required in relation to some claim which I believe you may not be acquainted with, I will proceed to explain that to you. Many of these claims are obviously self-explanatory, so I may not need to explain, especially to lawyers. So I'll start with Clause 4. Clause 4 of the 2017 Act defines the various maritime claims in relation to which you may arrest a ship by virtue of an action in rem. The first one is 4A, that is a dispute regarding the possession or ownership of a vessel or the ownership of any share therein. I think it's quite self-explanatory. The next one is dispute between co-owners of a ship as to the employment or earnings of the vessel. The third one, that is C, is mortgage or charge of the same nature on a vessel. So obviously, if a vessel is mortgaged to a financial institution or a bank, and the shipping company hasn't paid the loan installments on time and is in default, the bank can foreclose the mortgage and file a suit for recovery of its dues, bring the vessel to sale, and eventually recover its dues in due course of time. Of course, after priorities are decided, which I will come to much later. So I'll proceed to the next one. That is E. Loss of life or personal injury occurring whether on land or on water in direct connection with the operation of a vessel. Therefore, the loss of life or personal injury should occur due to a direct connection with the operation of a vessel. F. Loss or damage to in connection with any goods. Now, this is quite obvious. Vessels are actually brought onto waters for the purpose of carrying goods from one place to another. What happens if the vessel sinks and the goods are lost? What happens if the goods are damaged during the voyage? What happens if some portion of the goods are not delivered? Obviously, the owner of the goods, having a title to the goods by virtue of a bill of lading, may institute an action in relation to loss of goods against the shipping company by institution of an action in rem. Then we come to G, agreement relating to the carriage of goods or passengers on board a vessel, whether contained in a charter party or otherwise. So if you have an agreement relating to carriage of goods on board a ship, whether contained in a charter party or otherwise, it is a maritime claim. Now, what is a charter party? A charter party is a form of an agreement entered into between the owner of a ship and the charterer. Now, there are three types of charters recognized in shipping law. One is a time charter. As the word indicates, it's quite obvious the ship owner gives his ship on charter to the charterer for a particular period of time, say 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. That's why it's called a time charter. At the expiry of that period, the ship is required to be returned to the owner. So it's called a time charter party. Then you have a voyage charter party. Once again, it's quite obvious. The ship owner gives his ship to the charterer to perform a particular voyage from point A to point B. After the completion of the voyage, once again, the vessel has got to be redelivered to the ship owner. And the third kind of charter is called a demise charter or a bareboat charter. Now, what is a demise charter and how is it different from a time charter and a voyage charter? The answer is this. A demise charter is one where the ship owner gives his bare boat to the charterer. In other words, he only gives the ship to the charterer. It is the responsibility of the charterer to arrange for the master and crew, to arrange for the food and provisions, to supply fuel to the vessel, and to take care of all the needs of the vessel. It is something like a wet lease, and the charterer during the period of that charter, that is the demise charter, is considered in law to be the pro hac vice owner of the vessel during the duration of that charter. So that is a demise charter. So these are the three kinds of charter parties recognized in law. And a charter party essentially is basically just an agreement entered into between a ship owner and a charterer. Now, sometimes vessels are sub-chartered. Now, for example, if I am the owner of a ship, I charter it to A. A in turn charters it to B, and then B in turn charters it to C. That is perfectly permissible in law as long as that there is such a right to sublet available in the contract. Now I'll come to the next item, that is section, yes, that is H, agreement relating to the use and hire of a vessel. I think I've done that. I'll come to the next one, sorry. Salvage services including, if applicable, special compensation relating to salvage services in respect of a vessel which by itself or its cargo threatens damage to the environment. Now, what are salvage services? Very often ships are in distress during their voyage. Sometimes ships experience problems with the propeller, sometimes with the engines. Sometimes ships run into a heavy storm, and for some reason or the other, the ship is in distress. Now, in the shipping world, you have professional salvors. So just as you have the WIAA that comes forward to help cars that have suddenly stopped in the middle of the road, they come with a mechanic and they come with their towing van and they come and help you. Similarly, you have professional salvors who come with tugs and all specialized equipment and specialized personnel who come to rescue or rather save a ship which is in distress. More often than not, they make the ship owner sign a Lloyd's open form, which contains detailed terms and conditions in relation to the service to be rendered. And then once the service is rendered, the matter goes to arbitration, and the arbitrator decides what is the reward that is to be given to the salvor for assisting the vessel in distress. So therefore, if a salvor who has assisted a vessel in distress has not been paid salvage services and he wants to secure his claim, what does he do? He files an action in rem. He arrests the vessel in relation to a claim for salvage services because he is a salvor. He's rescued the ship when it was in distress. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on salvage services because this is a topic in itself and it would take me at least an hour to explain to you what it includes. But if you have a look at my note, which I have emailed to you separately, you will get an idea about it. I'll move on to the next item, that is towage. Towage, as the name indicates, where one vessel again is in some kind of a difficulty. It cannot move on its own engine. It is not self-propelled. Sometimes it's a dumb barge. It requires to be towed from point A to point B. So you have a tug or you have a ship which actually has a tow line which tows the vessel to a particular destination. That is called towage. So he's entitled to a remuneration for that. And if he is not paid for that, he can arrest a vessel in rem. Then the next one is pilotage. What is a pilotage? Pilotage is a service offered by a port to a foreign ship which is entering its precincts. Now, obviously, the master of the vessel is a foreigner. He may not be aware of the peculiarities of the port. So every port will have a pilot who actually boards the vessel when it comes into the precincts of the port to guide the master of the vessel to bring the vessel into the port and safely anchor it at a particular spot so that it can carry out its loading and unloading operations. Now, for that, a particular fee has to be paid to the pilot. If he's not paid, he can take out an action and arrest the vessel. Then we come to L, that's goods, material, perishables, non-perishable, bunker, fuel, etc. supplied to the ship. I mentioned that to you earlier. If I supply something to the ship, like food, provisions, fuel oil, any equipment, spares, etc. If the ship owner doesn't pay for it, it's a maritime claim. And the next one is M, construction, reconstruction, repair, converting or equipping of the vessel. I think these words are self-explanatory, don't require any explanation from me. We come to N, which is dues in connection with any port, harbor, canal, dock or light, etc., etc. Then claim by a master or member of the crew of a vessel or their heirs and dependents or wages. So that's quite obvious. If you don't pay wages, the crew can arrest your ship. Disbursements incurred on behalf of the vessel or its master, that's item P. So if the master incurs any expense, he must be reimbursed. And finally, we come to, there are still a few more, particular average or general average. Then you have disputes arising out of contract for the sale of the vessel. You have insurance premium. This is included for the first time in the 2017 Act by virtue of the judgment of the Sea Success case of the Supreme Court in 2004. Then you have commission, brokerage and agency fees payable in respect of a vessel by or on behalf of the vessel owner or the demised charterer. Then you have damage or threat of damage caused to the environment, coastline. You have cost and expenses relating to removal, recovery and destruction or rendering harmless of a vessel which is sunk, wrecked or stranded or abandoned. So if a vessel is abandoned, it is sunk, it is wrecked, it could cause an obstruction in the channel. It could be a hazard to shipping. Many other ships could collide with it and suffer structural damage. So anybody removing these obstructions is entitled to be repaid all the expenses that he has incurred, including a remuneration and compensation. And if he's not paid, he can obviously arrest a vessel in an action in rem. And the last one is a maritime lien. Now, what is a maritime lien? A maritime lien is a privileged claim. It is privileged because it survives change of ownership. It sticks to the vessel like a leech and follows it even in the hands of a bona fide purchaser for value without notice. Normally, a maritime claim comes to an end the moment the ownership of the vessel changes hands. So, for example, if I have a claim against vessel A, but before I can file my action in rem against vessel A for recovery of my claim, vessel A has been sold by its owner to somebody else, then my action in rem against that vessel comes to an end because the maritime claim cannot be enforced against an owner who is not personally liable for the claim. But what is special about a maritime lien is this, that it is a privileged claim and it survives change of ownership. So even if an innocent buyer who had no knowledge about any prior claim against the vessel, he is liable to pay for that claim. And if he doesn't pay for it, his vessel is liable to be arrested, even though he's an innocent purchaser for value without notice. There are very few privileged claims that are recognized in law. In common law, we had 5 maritime liens. Now, in fact, the maritime liens have been specified in the Admiralty Act 2017, that is section 9. And I would request you to go through that. Section 10 provides for order of priority of various maritime claims. Now, when I come to priority of claims, let me explain to you what happens after a vessel is arrested. What is the procedure of an arrest of a ship? So first things first, when you file the plaint, you will move an urgent application for the arrest of a ship. Now, like any other suit which you're moving for ad interim reliefs, you will file a precipice in the morning at 11 o'clock or at 3 o'clock and request the judge to take it up urgently. Now, Admiralty jurisdiction is such that you can't wait indefinitely. You can't wait for 2 days or 3 days for the matter to be placed on board to hear your application for arrest of the ship. You need it to be heard. There are occasions when you will have to move the court sometimes at night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. You may have to move the judge on a holiday, on a Sunday, on Dasera. So if you are asking me whether it is possible, the answer is yes. In fact, I have, during my career, spanning several years now, moved so many applications before the judge's house. I have once moved Justice Deshmukh's house way back in 2010 at 11 o'clock at night. That's because, of course, he was not available before that. He had gone to attend a wedding, but he returned from the wedding and we moved the application at 11 o'clock at night. I have gone to Justice Dharmadhikari's house on Dasera to obtain an order of arrest. So applications for arrest made after court hours at the judge's residence or even on a holiday, and judges recognize the urgency in the matter. Why? Because the ship is coming into the port only for a matter of a few hours. It may sail away in a matter of few hours. It may sail away on the weekend. So by the time you obtain the order of arrest and inform the port authorities, it might be too late. The ship would have sailed away. Therefore, you will be entitled to move an application. The judge will hear you almost immediately. If you move at 11 o'clock, he will call for the papers at 3 o'clock. He will hear your application then and there. The application is always heard ex parte. When I say ex parte, I mean you did not give notice of the application to the ship owner. Reason being, if you give notice, there is a serious risk of the master being notified and the master lifting anchor and sailing away before you can arrest the vessel, thereby rendering your claim to be infructuous. So you move the application, you obtain an order of arrest, you then move to the deputy sheriff's office, which is in the city civil court. You apprise him the arrest order being passed. He will depute a bailiff to serve the warrant of arrest on the ship. Once the ship is arrested, then obviously the ship owner will come forward through a lawyer to represent himself. He will obviously have a lawyer who will represent the ship the ship as well as the ship owner. So you will immediately get a letter from the lawyer for the ship owner informing you that he's filed his wakalatnama and that you should serve the papers and proceedings upon him. If he has a good case to defend, he will probably take out a notice of motion for unconditionally vacating the order of arrest. If the vessel has to sail away urgently, he may furnish security in relation to the claim and thereafter challenge the arrest. Now, what happens when the vessel is arrested? When the vessel is arrested, the ship owner has various options. He can either furnish security and take a ship away, or he can challenge the arrest. If he challenges the arrest, it could take up to 2 to 3 weeks for the application to be heard, in which case, obviously, ship owners suffering a lot of losses because he has to pay for his crew, he has to burn fuel oil, he has to pay port dues, as a result of which he is very keen to ensure his ship sails away urgently. So more often than not, security is furnished. Now, the court will never allow a ship to sail away unless adequate security is furnished. Security is furnished generally by a bank guarantee of a nationalized bank to cover the entire claim, plus interest, plus cost, or a cash deposit may be made. Sometimes there is grave urgency and it may take some time for security to be furnished. So if the plaintiff lawyer and the defendant's lawyer come to an understanding, sometimes a P&I club letter of undertaking is accepted as a stopgap arrangement. Now, what is a P&I club? P&I club effectively is like an insurance company of a shipping company. So they protect the interest of the shipping company. And if the ship is arrested, the P&I comes forward and issues an undertaking that it will honor any claim or secure any claim in the event of a decree being passed. Now, more often than not, people don't accept P&I club letters of undertaking, but they do accept it as a temporary measure pending substitution of that security with a bank guarantee or a cash deposit. So once the security is furnished, then the suit will continue in its own course. The ship owner is required to file its written statement. The case goes to trial. If the ship owner believes that the suit has been wrongly filed, there is no cause of action against the vessel, the wrong vessel has been arrested, etc., etc., he has the right to file a notice of motion for seeking release of the security unconditionally. So he may first furnish the security and thereafter take out a notice of motion for return of the security that will be heard on its own merits, and eventually an order will be passed either sustaining the order of arrest or vacating the order of arrest. Very often if the order of arrest of a ship has been vacated, the ship owner obviously has suffered grave losses. Now, there is a provision in the High Court rules which requires the plaintiff to give an undertaking to the court to pay damages in the event of the ship owner suffering any prejudice due to the arrest. So, if it is found that the plaintiff had no right to arrest the vessel for any reason, the ship owner can always file a notice of motion, either a counterclaim or a fresh suit seeking damages for wrongful arrest of the vessel. Now, in England, the law was you need to establish that the plaintiff acted mala fide or in crassa negligentia. But under Indian law, you don't need to establish either of these two tests. If you're able to establish that the plaintiff has wrongfully arrested your vessel and there was no justification for it or he had no cause of action, you can seek damages for wrongful arrest. So this is the scope of the admiralty jurisdiction of the court. Now, you might wonder that when you file an ordinary suit, you have to apply for an order of injunction under Order 39, Rule 1, or you may want to apply for an order of attachment under Order 38, Rule 5. And unless you're able to establish a strong prima facie case, you will not get these orders. Now, obviously, an order of attachment before judgment is almost impossible to get unless you're able to establish that the person is either willfully selling his property with a view to defeat or delay your claim or to frustrate any decree being passed against you. Now, that test need not be established in admiralty law. In admiralty law, if you are able to show that you have a valid claim against the vessel, it is a maritime claim as listed in Article or rather Section 4 of the 2017 Act. You are entitled to an order of arrest. Period. Now, if anyone tells you that, oh, you've come after so many months, therefore I'm not granting you the order of arrest, that is not a good reason, because ships have very often don't come to India for weeks or months together. Sometimes they come once in a while. So if the claim has been incurred, say in Africa, and the ship has come for the first time to India after 1 year, obviously you're arresting it for the first time the moment it has come here. So merely because you have filed the suit more than 2 years after your cause of action has arisen is not a ground to refuse you arrest. You will not hear a judge telling you that, oh, you've come after 2 years, therefore no ad interim reliefs. It doesn't work like that in the admiralty jurisdiction of the court. Right? Now, I would like you to also have a look at section, just give me a second. Section 5. This is another very important section which you need to read very carefully before you move to arrest a ship in an action in personam. If you are not able to satisfy the guidelines or the principles of Section 5 in letter and in spirit, you are not entitled to an order of arrest of a ship. I'll just read it out to you. The High Court may order arrest of any vessel which is within its jurisdiction for the purpose of providing security against a maritime claim, which is the subject of an admiralty proceeding, where the court has reason to believe that a person who owned the vessel at the time when the maritime claim arose is liable for the claim and is the owner of the vessel when the arrest is effected, or B, the demised charterer of the vessel at the time when the maritime claim arose is liable for the claim and is the demised charterer or the owner of the vessel when the arrest is effected, or C, the claim is based on a mortgage or a charge of a similar nature on the vessel, or D, the claim relates to ownership or possession of the vessel, or E, the claim is against the owner, demised charterer, manager, or operator of the vessel and is secured by a maritime lien as provided in Section 9. 2. The High Court may also order arrest of any vessel for the purpose of providing security against a maritime claim in lieu of the vessel against which a maritime claim has been made under this act subject to the provisions of section 1, provided no vessel shall be arrested under subsection 1 in respect of a maritime claim under clause A of subsection 1 of section 4. So this is required to be satisfied. So section 4 and section 5 are the most critical sections which you need to satisfy before you obtain an order of arrest. If you are not able to satisfy the provisions of section 4 or section 5, your claim doesn't fall under these two parameters, then you cannot arrest the vessel. Now, what happens after you file the suit and the ship owner comes forward to defend the suit, but he doesn't furnish security? Sometimes he may not have the financial wherewithal to furnish security. So he just lets the vessel remain under arrest. If the vessel is remaining under arrest for an indefinite period of time, it is a depreciable asset. The claimant can then move an application for sale of the ship. Now, the sale of the ship is conducted by virtue of a public auction. You have to obtain an order of sale of the ship by taking out an interim application before the court. Once the court grants the order of sale, if you made out a case for sale, pendante lite, that is what they say, then it is advertised in certain newspapers, local and overseas newspapers, by the Sheriff of Mumbai. And then there are various bidders who are required to put in earnest money deposits with the Sheriff's office. And then on a particular date and time, the bids are opened in open court. Whoever is the highest bidder gets to buy the ship. Very often, after the bids are opened, the court nonetheless encourages the bidders to increase their bid. And often, I have seen that the bids have been increased sometimes by almost 50 to 100% than what was actually bid for in the sealed envelope. So once the vessel is eventually sold, the court will confirm the sale of the vessel. And the sale proceeds of the vessel will lie in court for the benefit of all claimants. So quite often you will find there are as many as 7 or 8 claimants who've got claims against this vessel and all have arrested the vessel. Now, once the vessel is arrested, any one party who has arrested the vessel or has obtained a decree in his favor, he can take out an application for determination of priorities of all the claims. Now, what do you mean by determination of priorities? Obviously, just like you have in company law, under admiralty law also, there are certain claims that are given a higher ranking over certain other claims which are considered to be inferior. So you have a maritime lien which is considered to be of a privileged nature, then you have a mortgage, then you have ordinary statutory claim. Now, priorities are determined in accordance with the provisions of the 2017 Act, and they have been actually listed out. It is in section 9 of the 2017 Act. So the court will then determine the priorities and decide, okay, claimant A is number 1, claimant B is number 2, claimant C is number 3, and claimant 4 is number 5, and proceed to then pass an order for payment out of the monies. Now, payment out is only made if all those claimants have obtained decrees in their favor. So if all of them have obtained decrees in their favor, then the monies are paid out in accordance with their claims. Now, sometimes what happens, the ship may be sold for say $1 million, but the mortgagee rather has filed a suit for $2 million, right? And then there are various other statutory claimants who have supplied equipment to the ship, etc., who have got smaller claims. Now, what happens in such a situation? In such a situation, the bank will take away all the money because their claim is for $2 million. The ship is worth only $1 million. They rank higher in priority over a statutory claimant, so they take the entire amount. Now, if for example, their claim is for less than $1 million, say it's only $500,000, then $500,000 still remains in the kitty to be distributed to the other claimants. And in accordance with their priority, those claims are satisfied. It could sometimes happen that some of the claimants may not get anything because their claims rank very low in priority, in which case they just give up. Or sometimes they intervene in suits filed by the mortgagee with a view to trouble them, and hopefully they can achieve a settlement with the mortgagee. So these are all tricks of the trade. Sometimes adverse claimants do employ in order to achieve a settlement of a claim which they know is lower in priority. Now, there is also a right of appeal provided in the Admiralty Act. So you don't have to refer to the Commercial Courts Act, because under the Commercial Courts Act, Admiralty and Vice Admiralty jurisdiction also forms a commercial suit. But the Admiralty Courts Act has its own section relating to appeals, and that will obviously prevail. And anybody who has a claim can then apply the provisions of the 2017 Act to file an appeal. Now, the court also has the option where there's a technical case involving, say, collision between two ships or salvage, to seek the assistance of experts like assessors to assist the court with technical aspects as to who's in the right and who's in the wrong. And the court seeks such assistance and then eventually passes its judgment. So this is effectively the Admiralty jurisdiction of the court. Now, if you have any questions, we've got 15 minutes left. I'd be happy to answer them.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
There are some questions which has been asked by the participants. A question is from Advocate Prashant IRA. His question is, only High Court have the jurisdiction for this act?
Yes, that's correct. Only high courts, and high courts which are basically have coastal states. So if you look at the 2017 Act, it is only the High Court that has got jurisdiction, and high courts of coastal states. That is, please have a look at section 2, subsection 1E, E for elephant. It lists the number of ports, that is Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, Karnataka, Gujarat, Orissa, Kerala, Hyderabad, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. These are the courts. These are the high courts that have got jurisdiction under section 2(1)(e).
Okay. The next question is from Merrill. The question is, dear sir, is it possible that I can apply to the Admiralty Court to arrest the vessel for security purpose and also proceed with arbitration simultaneously?
Yes, there is a judgment recently passed in the Altus Uber case, where, and I would request you to read that judgment carefully. It's a judgment of Justice Sriram passed, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018 or 19, where Justice Sriram has held that there is no bar, but what you need to basically do is you need to frame your prayers very carefully. And I would suggest you read that judgment very carefully, and that judgment will give you the answer to your question. You can do it, but you can do it in a particular way. Please read that judgment, because that judgment sets out what is the procedure that you need to follow in order to be able to arrest the vessel as security for an arbitration. That judgment is up in appeal. The appeal was dismissed. It has now gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is seized of the matter, but one never knows when it will be eventually decided finally by the Supreme Court.
Okay. The next question is from Supriya. For the purposes of limitation, whether arrest of ship would amount to seizure or injunction?
Arrest of ship would amount to seizure, and that has been decided by Justice Gupte in the Tongli Yantai case. I had appeared in that case. It has been decided in 2018 or 2019. It is the Tongli Yantai versus Great Pacific Navigation, GPN, Tongli Yantai. Justice Gupta's judgment 2018 or 2019, which says that it amounts to a seizure. It is not really an injunction. And you can also read the judgment of the Justice Mota in the it's a Russian name, Eco Hydrotechnica's case of 2010. But that judgment has been dealt with and considered by Justice Gupte. And Justice Gupte has said that an arrest amounts to a seizure, even though it was argued by us that it is not a seizure, but he has in fact gone on to hold that it is akin to a seizure.
Okay. The next question is from Steven Matthew. Sir, what happens to claims that are already filed before the NCLT? Can one still invoke Admiralty in jurisdiction?
See, if you are an operational creditor, then I don't think you can have your fingers in two pies. If you're a financial creditor, it is something quite different. because an operational creditor may not be able to maintain an action in the NCLT at the same time a civil action in the court under the IBC rules. But if you are a financial creditor like a bank, you will be able to arrest the vessel, bring it to sale at the same time if you want move before the NCLT. There is no bar to that. But generally, the Admiralty Court is the best option, because the first thing you can do is to prevent the vessel from sailing out. So you have complete control of the vessel. It's not permitted to leave the port. You can bring it to sale. You can get the monies deposited into port, and once the monies are deposited into port, it earns interest. So, and if you're a mortgagee, you have a very high priority. Save and accept maritime lien holders, you are number 2 in priority. So there's a good chance you'll be able to recover your money.
Okay. Next question is from Neil Vasant. Sir, what % of the sale proceeds of a vessel goes to the sheriff as poundage?
Yes, good question. Good question. I'm so sorry I did not have the time to deal with it. The 2020 High Court rules have come into effect. And I'll just read it out to you. I'm glad you asked me this question. Just open to the rules. 2002 High Court rules. Just give me a second. The rules, in fact, have now prescribed 500 rupees as poundage. Earlier, it was 1% under Rule 474 of the High Court Rules OS 1980, and that was challenged, in fact, in a case where I had appeared, and the court held that if there is no settlement achieved, then you don't have to pay 1% poundage. The state filed an appeal against that, and the appeal is still pending. However, in the meantime, the court was so shocked that the sheriff's office is entitled to charge 1% on the amount received, because in an admiralty action, sometimes the stakes involved are running into millions of dollars. So imagine if there's a claim of $10 million, 1% of $10 million the sheriff claims only for the purpose of doing an administrative job of serving a warrant of arrest of a ship. So you paid 3 lakhs of rupees maximum court fees for a high court judge to decide a suit in a full-fledged trial, but you pay 1% poundage to the sheriff's office for just doing a ministerial job of serving a warrant of arrest. So that pricked the court's conscience, and it was revisited, and the Admiralty rules of 2020 has now reduced it to 500 rupees. That is to be found. Just give me a second. I'll tell you the exact rule number. Yes, rule 1100 of the 2020 rules. It is now only 500 rupees, no longer 1%. Thank you for asking that question. That was a good question.
Okay, moving on to the next one. The next question is from Prathamesh Kamath. Can a suit be filed before the vessel enters the territorial jurisdiction but move for arrest after the vessel entered into territorial waters of India? Would
yes.
arrest be valid?
Yes, that's a good question. If you refer to my note, which I have prepared, obviously due to paucity of time, I could not deal with the whole note. But if you look at paragraph number 12 of that note, which I have sent you, I have actually dealt with this issue. The answer is this: the vessel is required to be within territorial waters of India in order to arrest it. But in a case in 2005 called the Gitanjali Woolen versus Express Annapurna case, 2005 of Justice Kamdar, he held that if the vessel is not within territorial waters, but if you've obtained an order of arrest of the vessel and the vessel comes in subsequently, that is after the filing of the suit and issuance of the order of arrest, you can nonetheless arrest the vessel. Now here the judge actually relied upon English law and English precedents, because in England you can issue a writ and wait for the ship to come in and then arrest, but that's not the procedure here in India. In India, you need to file a suit in accordance with the provisions of the Code of Civil Procedure. So you make the defendant a party to the suit, and then you proceed to arrest it once it is within the jurisdiction of the court. Now, Express Annapurna's case, unfortunately, has not yet been set aside, but if you ask me my personal view, the judgment in the Express Annapurna case is incorrect because it relies upon English law, and English law is at variance with Indian law.
Okay. Due to paucity of time, we'll take maximum 2 questions more. The next question is from Sohan. Would you advise young lawyers to take up shipping law practice are there a lot of maritime cases filed in Bombay High Court?
There are a lot of maritime cases filed all over India. In fact, until 2017, Bombay had the highest number of cases filed because it enjoyed pan-Indian jurisdiction. But the moment the 2017 Act came into force, a majority of the work has now gone to Gujarat because Gujarat has a very vast coastline and several ships visit Gujarat and very few ships come to Bombay. Now, Mumbai Port Trust as such does not entertain so many vessels. Ships don't really come much to the Mumbai Port Trust, but they go to JNPT, that is Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust. So there are ships that come to JNPT, but not as many ships that come to JNPT as opposed to, say, Gujarat. But yes, maritime lawyers do fly to various courts to obtain order of arrest. And there is some amount of work in the subject. The subject is very interesting. It's got an international flavor. So there are a lot of international arbitrations to be done, a lot of opinion work to be done. And I find it intellectually a very stimulating subject.
Okay, last question for today's webinar. The question is from Aisha Kazi. How effective is filing a caveat against the arrest of a vessel in preventing arrest of that vessel?
Yes, good question. See, there are different kinds of caveats filed. One is a caveat against arrest of a vessel. One is a caveat against release of a vessel or release of a sale proceeds. Now, very often, a party, say a ship owner, apprehends that if he brings the vessel to India or any other jurisdiction, there is a strong likelihood of it being arrested because obviously he has incurred a claim. Now, he hasn't settled that claim, but he anticipates an action being brought against him. But at the same time, he doesn't want to prevent he doesn't want the ship to lie in port under arrest indefinitely. So what he normally does is he files a caveat against arrest. Now, what is a caveat against arrest? It's basically a notice to anybody who's arresting the ship, because when you arrest a ship, you have to check the caveat against arrest book to find out if there's any caveat. So if there is a caveat, the law requires you to give notice to the caveator that you're going to move the port for arrest of a ship. But there is also a rule which says that notwithstanding the filing of a caveat, the claimant may nonetheless proceed to arrest a vessel. So more often than not, you will find claimants who, despite the existence of the caveat, move the court and tell the court that I have filed this caveat, I have filed this suit. There is no doubt a caveat pending, which is a caveat against arrest, but I don't want to give notice to the ship owner because if I give him notice, he will sail away and I won't be able to arrest the vessel. Our caveat is required to mention the amount of security that the ship owner is willing to provide. Invariably, you will find ship owners saying that we will provide security in the sum of 1 lakh of rupees. That by itself is not sufficient. It's a pittance. Your claim may be running into crores. You're not going to give him notice for 1 lakh of rupees or such other sum that the court may determine. Now, in such a situation, a claimant doesn't want to take a risk. So even if there's a caveat pending, he will go and arrest a vessel. He'll inform the court and obtain an order of arrest. Or alternatively, if he wants to go strictly by the book at his own peril, he may give notice. In which case, the ship owner is required to furnish security of either 1 lakh or such sum that the court may determine. If he fails to furnish the security determined by the court, which may be more than 1 lakh of rupees, would be equivalent to the amount of the claim in the suit, then in such an event, the claimant can request the court to place the suit on board for passing judgment in default against such a ship owner who has failed to honor his commitment in the caveat against arrest book.
Okay, so we can conclude our question answer session here as well as our webinar. I would really like to thank Advocate Rahul Nachania for enlightening us on today's topic. We are sure to have many more sessions by you, and this continuous learning program will continue, and we will be adding more and more value from time to time for lawyers and law students to lift our legal profession to new heights. Thank you so much, sir. It was really a very good lecture. Thank you so much for your precious time for sharing your knowledge. And secondly, I would also like to thank all the participants who have joined. Thank you so much. Be safe, stay healthy. Jai Hind.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.